but I don't know if we've got Kate or Ben. Are you here?
This meeting is being recorded and or transcribed.
Ben and I are both here. Let me check the attendee list and make sure we have a quorum. Okay.
Jacob is here on the phone.
You got Jacob on the phone, Kathy, Sarah Francis, Virginia, Camp, and then it looks like there's one other phone number. Who is that?
Lance.
Lance, okay.
Lance, yeah.
Okay.
Is that a quorum?
Hang on one second. Yeah, so we should be good. That's 6 of y'all. So, and I know Ren Green, our applicant, is here. Everybody, if you can remember, stay muted when you're not speaking. And that's about it. If you're calling from the phone, I believe *6. What has it been? *67 allows you to speak. Oh, *6 will allow you to speak. All right, so take it away, Sarah Francis.
Okay, let's call the Monday, July 20th, 2020 meeting of the Oxford Historic Preservation Commission to order. Everybody should have an agenda. Any changes or additions to the agenda? All right, hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
In a second. Camp holding up his fingers. We have a second. And all in favor of approval of the agenda, aye?
Aye.
Okay, the agenda's approved. And then the approval of the minutes from June 15th, 2020. I hope you've had a chance to read them. Whoever did them, good job on that demolition discussion, because we've really gotten the weeds. So
thanks. I thought it was better to be thorough for that one.
Yeah, they were really good. Any additions or corrections to the minutes from June 15th? Okay, hearing none. Motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All right, all in favor of approval of the minutes? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, the minutes are approved.
And then Sarah Francis, can you hang on one second? It looks like Joel joined, and then we have one other phone number. Who is that? I know Lance is on the phone. Is somebody else on the phone?
I'm on the phone, Jacob, but I've been here a while.
Right, okay. Maybe they drop back off. I don't know who that is. All right.
Diane would be, is she the only one?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, Joel. Okay, next on the agenda, we had 2 administrative approvals.
That's the conference line.
Case number 583A and case number 585A, and those were pretty minor and were approved. I do want to just mention case number 585A was in addition to bathrooms on some units that you access from 11th Street. I did have a call from a neighbor who was concerned about it, but the concerns really weren't with the design. They were more zoning and planning issues, just worried about adding a bathroom to the apartments that were there. So I did just want to note that the approval was just for the design, not the use. Any questions about any of those? Okay, let's move on. Public hearing for case number 584, COA requested by Ren Green. And this is 503 North Lamar Boulevard. And I think we have Ren Green
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, just tell us quickly what you want to do.
Well, what the homeowner really wanted to do was remove that Chippendale balustrade around the front porch of that house. I felt like it was probably not original, and it has, over the years, it has continued to cause water intrusion, and being an old frame house, it's just doing a lot of damage. And so the homeowner, my client, had asked that would it be possible to remove it, because she's had many people look at it and work on it. She's been unable to stop the water.
Hello, Commissioners. Hello, Commissioners. I'm sorry that I'm late. Hope I'm not too disruptive.
Is that Jack?
Yes. Hello. Sorry that I'm late.
Hey, Jack. Ren Green was just taking us through case number 584.
Okay, I'm with you.
Great.
So, at any rate, as I was saying, the balustrade over that porch has been an ongoing problem with water intrusion, and she wanted to know if it could be removed. In my opinion, I didn't think it was original to the home, but Catherine and I have talked about it a few times, and she thinks perhaps it could have been, but it has been a difficult. It's been something several people have worked on, been unable to stop it from leaking. And so we were seeking to remove it. It is on a hip roof. It's hard to see in that photograph, but it's not a flat roof. And I had never seen that application on a hip roof before, so I felt like maybe it was added at a later date.
Okay, commissioners, any thoughts?
This is Joel.
Yes.
I would tend to agree with him that it is probably not original to the house, and I would say it's a shame that we probably didn't do any, or they didn't do any checking on that, because I believe some of the previous owners could help bring that out as a child. I don't remember that being there, but that's not any sort of proof at all.
Hey, Joel, could you repeat that? I couldn't quite hear
that
you.
much.
Could you repeat that, Joel?
I'm sorry?
Could you repeat that?
I was saying that I would agree that I don't believe that is original to the house. And I would think if you did a little research on it, you could find it out. It's a shame that was not done. And I also said, as a child, I don't remember seeing that on there, but I couldn't swear to that in court.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, this is Kate. I wasn't able to find any photos or archival evidence to go either way. It certainly is a feature that was used on colonial revival houses, more typically on a 2-story building, but sometimes on a 1-story. I found plenty of examples of that. So without being able to get up there and see how it's attached or anything like that, I just recommended retention because it does match the style of the house, and I wasn't able to confirm or deny. So anyway, that's sort of where the staff was coming from.
I've been up and looked at the inside. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I can't find any. It's all framed out of modern 2x material. It's 3 by 1.5. It's material that's certainly modern, and I can't see any old flashings, copper, or anything that looks to have been old enough for that to have been on the house, for any considerable length of time, because all of the materials used on it and on the flashing around it is relatively modern.
This is Jack. I was just going to say that this is a tough one for me, because when I look at that house, that is part of the architectural detail that I associate with it and have for many, many years. So I understand that it perhaps is not historically significant, and I do appreciate the fact that the problem with the roof is a serious one, but I would hate to see it taken down and not replaced.
We have other thoughts?
Hello from Virginia.
Yes.
I have mixed thoughts because I agree with Joel. I'm not sure it's original, but it's such a defining element of this house, and it is appropriate for this house. So I'm just a little reluctant to agree to take it down. I mean, maybe if there is some documentation of the house without it, but I'm just a little reluctant to not at least replace it in kind.
Mm-hmm.
Ren, had the owner considered replacement in kind after repairing the roof? Is that something they've looked into?
We've discussed it. Yeah, no, the owner is not adverse to the railing. She's just, the maintenance she's just grown weary of the leaks and the problems. I think for it to be executed and for it to be done properly, it needs to be built out of something better. Would it be, what would y'all's thoughts be on something with a similar design out of iron, that could ride on top of the roof with just a couple of anchor points instead of 6 or 8 penetrations through the roof that are actually attached through, nails and screws to the decking below. One of my thoughts was to build it out of iron, out of one piece, and then that way you could reduce the number of penetrations in the roof, retain the look, and have something up there that would deal with the weather a little better. I know that doesn't really fit that style of house necessarily, but given the maintenance issues, I think that it would, I think the greater good is protecting the house from water.
I've got to say, this is Kate again, that idea doesn't really meet the design guidelines. They usually recommend if something is going to be replaced that it's with a like material or a material that replicates. If the like material can't be used, a material that replicates it, I don't know if maybe some kind of composite or something like that would be acceptable. I don't know if that would, I think you'd still have to have the same number of holes in the roof for that, but I don't think that iron would be typical. So I'm not sure. I think we'd have to see it, but I don't know about that. And we can see how the commissioners feel, but I think based on the guidelines, that would be a difficult sell.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think, whether or not it was original would be appropriate to that era house. That's really what we would need to stick with. Is something, if it is a composite, something that looks just like that. But I think iron would be taking it into something else.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how to do it and do it where it's going. I don't know. I'm happy to do some research. I just don't know how you piece something together that if it were a flat roof, then it would be pretty straightforward, and that's typically where you see that sort of design element. So on a pitched shingled roof, I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying that I'm not sure how to do it.
Yeah.
Sarah Francis?
Yes.
You remember the old Etheridge house? They had trouble with it up there. I think it's on a flat roof, but I don't know what kind of materials they ended up using over there on,
what street?
Is it 11th? Tommy Etheridge's old house? And his granddaughter's living in it?
South 11th.
South 11th? Didn't we have something like this? But I believe they had a flat roof. but I'm not sure what kind of material they used when they built it back.
Uh-huh. Do we have other thoughts about it? We could vote on it, Ren, and see where we are.
I can't.
And then, if we deny it, then maybe we could talk about options.
Okay.
You wanna try-
Whatever, again, neither the homeowner nor I neither one of us are trying to corrupt anything of our.
Sure.
That's fine.
But we are trying to protect the house from the damage of moisture and then termites and everything else that go along with that in a frame structure.
Right.
Age.
I'm staring at the picture and I'm trying to picture, what it would look like without that feature. And it does have the little gable, so the porch is set off separately from the rest of the roof, but,
It's hard to see in that picture. It has a fairly low-pitched hip roof over it.
why don't, do I hear a motion to approve?
Is the motion to remove it, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, well, that saves us the trouble.
Okay.
Hey, Sarah, Francis, and Ren, let me just make a brief comment. If,
Yes.
I mean, clearly there was not a motion to approve the request to remove that, but, and certainly that's not necessarily a denial, but if, I'm sorry, my cell phone just started making me all kinds of sound. My apologies. So if, Ren, you wanted to explore other options, if you wanted to take a look around, if you wanted to potentially come up with a concept out of iron, it sounds like at least Kate's not supportive of it, and I don't know what the rest of the commission feels, but if you wanted to take a look at the potential for other concepts, other maybe materials, then you could request that this be tabled until the next month's meeting to allow you time to either, to come up with that option. And if you decide that that's, you just don't want to go down that path at a later point, you could always just withdraw that request at that time, but at least it would allow you a little bit of time to come up with some alternative concepts for the commission to be able to consider prior to the next meeting.
And that sounds reasonable to me. I think so. Even I'll need approval to do anything with it, even if it is to replace it with something similar or identical. It will still have to be approved.
No, that's not correct. If it's in kind, Kate and us, we can evaluate it just to make sure that materials are in kind, and then if you're going to, if it is in kind, then you can go ahead and rebuild it. If you wanted to change the look of it, if you wanted to change the material.
Yeah, design, material,
placement,
and application are usually what we go for.
Location, maybe,
Uh-huh.
then that would require an approval by the commission.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's table it and let me see. Being where it is, I knew that it was going to probably be an uphill battle, but we just thought we would try. If we can table it, then give me a couple of weeks to see what I can come up with that will be a suitable long-term, solution that will keep the same look. And then if it winds up being anything different, then we'll reconvene on it next month. And if it doesn't, then we'll just put it back like it is.
Perfect.
Point of order question?
Yeah.
Can we table a motion we've already voted on?
You didn't vote on
We
it.
didn't vote.
Oh, okay.
No one made a motion.
Nobody made a motion.
I see. I'm with you.
Somebody could make a motion to table the request, though.
That's probably right.
Let's do that.
I would
Someone,
make that motion.
do I hear a favor of tabling case 584?
Hey, Ren? Yeah, Ren. This is Lance Butler. How you doing?
Good, Lance, how are you?
Doing fine. Listen, if memory serves me correctly, Curtis Knight and Terry Lytle did extensive renovation on that house maybe 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. I believe that's I think that's who did it, who put that rail up there, because I was working for a company. We took that house on trade when they moved out of it. And so I've known the homeowner there for 20 years.
Yeah,
Curtis is gone, but Terry is not.
Terry lives in Tupelo now. I think he works in the medical field over there in Tupelo. I think he still lives over here, maybe, but I works over in Tupelo, but lives over here. I think that's what it is. You might want to contact him.
That's a good idea, Lance. Good idea. I hadn't thought about Terry, but yeah, I've known the house for 20 years, and like I say, I've known the lady who lived there since she moved in. Yeah, I'll reach out to Terry, and maybe he's got pictures of it from when he bought it. I'm guessing that they're the ones that asked it, but I may be wrong.
Yeah, I just want to give you a heads up on
Joel Little. How you doing?
I'm good.
Before Terry and Curtis was Nancy Carroll and Mickey King. I think they're the first people that did extensive renovations on the house, probably 30-something years ago.
What were those names again? I didn't catch it, Joe.
Mickey and Nancy Carroll King.
Okay.
They live on South.
Are they still around?
Yeah, they live on South Smart. They just built a house on South Smart on the right-hand side, going down to the roundabout.
Oh, sure. The white
Right, that's right.
siding house. They've been building it for quite some time.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let me reach out to Terry, and maybe I can reach out to the Kings, and maybe somebody has a photograph that might help the call.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Hey, thanks for y'all's time. I'm sorry to be the only one on the agenda and making y'all all do this afternoon, but I do appreciate it.
Thank you. we just have to roll over to our desk. So.
Good to see somebody.
Yeah.
Y'all take
They double our salaries.
That's right.
All right, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Yay.
We're out. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
All right, see y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
This meeting is no longer being recorded or transcribed.